Hello and welcome to the Good Fight Sports Podcast. My name is Kenny Cramer, your host of the show, and this is a newly um, decided podcast. Um, I've been wanting to have my own sports podcast for a while now, ever since I've been a part of the Lug Nuts podcast group. And it was an idea that I threw out, and I've just sat on it for a while. And um, now that I got a little bit of free time, I have decided to start the the sports podcast that I've been wanting to start. And I just never could come up with a good name. And with help from my pastor Steve and Nick, we came up with a good biblical sports name for the show, and we came up with the Good Fight. And it was one of those where it was said out loud, and where it's like that name just stuck from right there. And so we kind of rolled with it, and now we're starting to get it off the ground. So basically, a little bit about the podcast before I dive into the first episode here is basically we're going to focus on a lot of the local sports around the northern Indiana area, mostly LaVille and Notre Dame, one of which is my alma mater, my high school, LaVille, and Notre Dame, just because, well, it's the local college team around here, and I'm going to say I'm a big Notre Dame fan. I'm going to wear that on my sleeve a lot during the podcast's episodes. So we'll also cover some NCAA sports. That'll mainly include college football and college basketball, two of the two big college sports things, and then we're also going to cover a little bit of pro sports, NFL, NBA, and a little bit of NHL. Go Blackhawks, by the way. We're talking a lot about the Blackhawks and all that. So now let's dive right into episode 1 here, and we're going to start off with something that happened recently on Monday, the College Football Playoff National Championship, which featured number 3 TCU, who was 13-1 at the time, and the overall number 1 team, the Georgia Bulldogs, 14-0. And there was a lot of talk about how TCU could pull off probably one of the biggest upsets of the year, and maybe even in college football history, knocking off the powerhouse of Georgia, who was steamrolling and was caught off guard a little bit in their semifinal game, and we'll dive a little bit into that later. But there was also talk of like Georgia just going to demolish TCU as well, and I thought going into the game that Georgia would win. In a close game. And I think a lot of people thought that Georgia would win in a close game. And some people even thought that if everything went how they should, TCU could pull off the upset. And then we'll break down what happened in the game later. So we're going to dive a little bit into the teams here and some of the players and the coaches and what have you. So TCU, we're going to start with the Horned Frogs, TCU Horned Frogs. Their first semifinal game was the Verbo Fiesta Bowl against the number 2 team in the country, the Michigan Wolverines. And TCU came into that game red hot. Everything went their way. They made little to no mistakes. The mistakes they made were ones where you can clean up in a practice. Tip balls, some penalties that were kind of costly. But when TCU needed to score, they scored. and their defense stepped up to the challenge and stopped the Wolverines, who had the best rushing attack, and held them in check for most of the game. And TCU stopped Michigan twice in the red zone, also forcing a turnover inside the 2-yard line, which is unheard of for Michigan this year because they were cashing in every time they were in the red zone. And TCU stopped Michigan for 80% of the game, I would say. And TCU comes off with the win. 51-45 was the final in that game. So TCU was led by Max Duggan, the starting quarterback of the Horned Frogs. And going into the national championship game, he was 25-17 as a starting quarterback, which is not bad for a starter. He was also a Heisman Trophy finalist for this year. Let's dive into his background a little bit at TCU. He threw for a freshman record 2,077 yards, 15 touchdowns in 2019. That was his first year as a starter. Still going ahead in 2020, finished 6-4, and only played 10 games because of a short year due to COVID. And he threw for 1,795 yards and 10 touchdowns. So almost got back to the 2,000-yard mark as he did in 2019. But due to the only playing 10 games, he finished 6-4 and just below 1,800 yards and 10 touchdowns. He also ran for 526 yards and 10 touchdowns. So he was responsible for 20 touchdowns in 2020 alone, which is remarkable. That is really good for a starting quarterback. 2021, though, was when he had a little bit of uncertainty when he started 3-5 that year, and then he was benched for second-string quarterback. And because of that, the head coach at the time, Gary Patterson, he was fired, and the now head coach, and there was a interim head coach for the rest of that year, and then their current head coach, Sonny Dykes, stepped in and took over the team in 2022. So in 2022, in the offseason, there was a lot of speculation as to if Max Duggan would even get the starting spot due to Sonny Dykes coming in, and because of the fact that Dykes also said that there would be a competition for the starting quarterback, which everyone thought that Max Duggan would get that spot. But because of the competition and the new head coach, a lot of speculation was brought to Max Duggan as to, okay, well, he's probably not going to get the starting spot. In any case, he won the starting spot in this last season and then led the Horned Frogs to a 12-0 regular season, then lost to Kansas State in a rematch in the Big 12 championship game. They lost that 31-28 in overtime. The game was really close, and Kansas State kind of jumped onto TCU, but TCU then came back and forced overtime, and then Kansas State won it on a field goal to beat the Horned Frogs in the Big 12 championship. So then they beat Michigan, as I said, in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl, which was the semifinal game of the college football playoff. And then they reached the national championship after beating Michigan. So Sonny Dykes, head coach, who came into the national championship game 84-64 as a head coach. That was his total record, and he went 13-1 at K-State, Kansas State. And before he took over Kansas State, he was the head coach at Southern Methodist, SMU for short, and he was also a assistant under the late and who late Mike Leach, who passed away recently due to a heart attack. Leach was a great coach. He coached at Texas Tech, and he was and Leach was the start of the air raid offense, and he was good. And then he took over at Washington State, and then he went to Mississippi State, and that was where he was until he passed away this last year. He's going to be missed. He was missed by he's missed by all the teams that had him as a head coach, and college football was in a world of hurt when he passed. So anyway, Kansas the TCU Horned Frogs lost to Kansas State, as I said, in the Big 12 championship game, and then they were unranked to start the season, and then finished the season ranked number 3 in the final playoff poll, which had never happened before. Never had a unranked team reached the college football playoff. That was the first time that it's ever happened in the playoff era. And this was the first trip for TCU to the playoff and to the national championship. So TCU had never played in the playoff and the national championship game until this year, which was incredible. So now we'll move on to the Georgia Bulldogs, and they were coming off a close semifinal game against number 4 Ohio State, which Georgia won because of the fact that Ohio State missed a game-winning field goal with about 7 seconds left in the game, and it was crazy because when the Ohio State player kicked it, 2023 had just arrived. So Ohio State player kicked it as the new year was being brought in, which was pretty crazy. And Georgia trailed for most of the game. I mean, Ohio State really took it to Georgia, and Georgia responded in a way that a championship team would. They were down. They were almost down by 18 points at one point, and they responded. The mental edge that Georgia had in that game was, we're going to come back and we're going to win. You can kind of tell that Georgia just kind of responded in that way by, answering Ohio State and scoring when they had to. And the defense for Georgia stepped up and really won them the game. I mean, the defense for Georgia really won them the game, and Stetson Bennett didn't really have his great game at all. It was probably one of the worst games he's played in a while. And we'll dive into Stetson Bennett here in a little bit, but it was a great game. It was the best semifinal game out of the both. And so after Georgia beat Ohio State, they moved on to the national championship game. And so Georgia is and was led by Stetson Bennett, the fourth. And as a starting QB, he was 28-3 going into the national championship game. And his story is crazy because he was a former walk-on, and then Georgia wouldn't take him at the time, so he transferred over to Jones County Junior College, and he went there to basically prove himself. He wanted to prove himself for Georgia, and when he did, he threw for 1,840 yards and in 12 games at Jones County. And then after that year, he entered the transfer portal. He wanted to go to another school, but he committed to Georgia, and he was only a 3-star transfer at the time, and he transferred into Georgia in 2019 and became the backup. In 2020 became the starter, and then he became the backup in 2020 as well. In 2020 he did become the starter. My bad. Getting a little ahead of myself. Did become the starter in 2020, and then took the starting spot over JT Daniels, who transferred in from USC, and after he got hurt in the first game, and then led the Bulldogs in 2021 to a undefeated regular season. They lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, 41-24. And there was a lot of speculation after that game as to whether or not Bennett should be the starter, because at the time Daniels was healthy, and people were like, okay, well, let's put in Daniels because this Bennett guy can't step up to the plate. In any case, he continued to be the starter, and then led them to the 2021 national championship game in a rematch versus Alabama, which was a crazy game, and Georgia won because of Bennett and because of the defense again. So then in 2022, he was a starter, and he led the Bulldogs, a.k.a. the Dawgs, to a 12-0 regular season, and then beat LSU in the SEC championship, and then beat Ohio State in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, which then in turn returned them to the national championship. And they were going, if Georgia won the national championship game, they would be the first team to ever repeat as champions in the playoff era. So no team had ever repeated as champions. The only teams who came close, the only two teams that came close were Clemson and Alabama. Those were the only two teams that came close to repeating, but never got the opportunity because the other team would beat them. And so that's pretty crazy to think about as well, because the last time that a team had repeated was the 2011 and 2012 Alabama teams, when Alabama beat LSU in 2011 and then beat my Notre Dame Fighting Irish in the BCS National Championship game in 2012. That was the last time that a team had ever repeated as champions, which is crazy to think about because that was a decade ago. So at any rate, Georgia's head coach is Kirby Smart. And he came into the national championship game 80-15. And he's got a crazy story as well, because he graduated from UGA, Georgia, in 1998. So he's coaching at his alma mater, which is crazy to think about too. And he was a great player at Georgia. And then he's won two. He had already won 2 national championships as a defensive coordinator at Alabama, 2011 and 2012. And so he had been in the national championship before as a D coordinator, and he was also in the 2021 national championship with Georgia, which he won. So he's already got 3 national championships. 2 as a defensive coordinator and 1 as a head coach. So he knows the national championship. He knows how to get his teams prepared for that game. And his team was ready. So Georgia, to start the season, they beat Oregon 49-3. And that was just to start the season. And everyone was like, okay, Oregon is not as good as they think. And Georgia is absolutely light years above everyone else. I mean, it wasn't even close. And then during the season, they beat number 1 Tennessee 27-13 at home. And Georgia really manhandled the Volunteers in that game. I mean, the game really wasn't that close. So let's dive into the game, and there really isn't much to say other than Georgia just dominated TCU. I mean, it wasn't even close. Final score was 65-7. And that was the most points scored in an FBS bowl game and the largest margin of victory in the national championship. So a lot of records were set, and records that TCU didn't want to have set against them. And it was also the first team to repeat as champions in the playoff era. So Georgia's the first one to do it. And let's break down the quarterbacks here if we can. So Stetson Bennett finished 18 for 25 with 304 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then he ran for 39 yards and 2 touchdowns. So in the game, he was responsible for 6 touchdowns, which tied a record that Joe Burrow had set at LSU in 2019, my bad, for most touchdowns responsible for, which was also 6. So there has now been 2 starting quarterbacks that have been responsible for 6 touchdowns in 2 separate national championships, which is crazy. I mean, it is just crazy. Stetson Bennett, the fourth, had the game of his life. He could do whatever he wanted. He could throw the ball to whoever he wanted. Their tight end for Georgia, Bowers, who won the Best Tight End Award, beat out Michael Mayer for Notre Dame for the Best Tight End. And I'm not even going to go into why I think Mayer deserved it more than Bowers. That's a conversation for another time, and it's not on this podcast. Any rate, so Bennett finishes his career with just insane numbers. He finished 29-3 as a starter, so he was the winningest. He's the winningest quarterback in probably Georgia history. He's one of the best players to ever come out of Georgia now, and he threw for 8,428 yards, 66 touchdowns, to just 21 interceptions, and then ran for 530 yards and 14 touchdowns. And then he also had a 65% completion percentage, which is pretty darn good for college football. And now it's a question of, okay, is Bennett good enough to play in the NFL? Only being a hair short of 6 foot. A lot of people are saying, is he going to be tall enough to play in the NFL? I think he can. I think he's got the arm strength to play in the NFL. He certainly has the mindset to play in the NFL. I mean, in the national championship game, he showed that, he's not afraid to take the deep ball. But he also is like, okay, I'm going to take what the defense gives me as well. I mean, a lot of the times, Bennett really didn't throw long bombs down the field. He threw the ball to the receivers where the TCU defense was allowing him to throw the ball, and he torched that defense. I mean, he just torched it. And so flipping over to the TCU side, Max Duggan, he finished 14 for 22 for 152 yards, 2 interceptions. He threw no touchdowns. He was sacked 5 times, and he also scored the only touchdown for TCU on a run play from the 3-yard line. So he was the lone scorer for the Horned Frogs. I'll say that 5 times fast. So he finished his career 25-18 as a starter, threw for 9,618 yards, 73 touchdowns to 28 interceptions. And he also ran for 1,856 yards and 28 touchdowns. So he also had a great career. He was responsible for 56 touchdowns for the Horned Frogs, and he had a 60% completion percentage, which is not bad, but it's also not great. And for the coaches, Kirby Smart, he's now 81-15 as a head coach. That is crazy. He's a two-time national champion just as a head coach. He's a two-time SEC champion in 2017 and 22 with the Bulldogs. He's also a five-time SEC East Division champion, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021, and 22. And his record in bowl games is 8-2, with five of those coming in the college football playoff. So he's 5-1 in the college football playoff. On the flip side, Sonny Dykes now 84-65 as a head coach, and he doesn't have a whole lot of accolades. He does have a Western Athletic Conference championship in 2011 with Louisiana Tech, where he was before he took over SMU, and he's 2-4 in bowl games, but he's 1-1 in the college football playoff. So can TCU come back? It's going to be hard because they lose Max Duggan. But, I mean, what TCU did to get here is, I mean, they hit the transfer portal hard, and I expect nothing less from TCU to continue to hit the transfer portal and try and get more guys. It looks like TCU was trying to just win now rather than, build up their program. And it's kind of the opposite for Georgia. Georgia is one of those, they like to build their program up through recruiting and high school recruits. And that's not saying that Georgia doesn't get, the occasional transfer in or, players transferring out. I mean, all schools do. But, I mean, Georgia really wants to just develop raw talent. And, I mean, they have done it well. I mean, they are now, in my opinion, I think they have taken over the top spot in college football, replacing Alabama as that top spot. So, I mean, I think college football now revolves around Georgia. Georgia is going to be there, and it's going to be whoever's going to be facing Georgia better come ready to play, or you're going to be facing what TCU did in the national championship game. And, it's not going to be pretty because Georgia is going to take it to you, and they're not going to let up. I mean, during the game, late in the game, the fourth quarter, it was like 4th and 5, 4th and 4 for Georgia, and they were already up 59-7, and they were still going for it on 4th down. And that's nothing on TCU because Georgia had their backups in. So it's like, if you can't stop our backups, there's no problem here. I mean, you got to stop the backups for there to even be anything remotely wrong about that. So Georgia was light years above TCU in terms of talent and just ready to come in for play. And so it was the most lopsided game I have ever watched in a while. It was crazy, and it was pretty boring, to say the least. So let's flip to some high school news and other things. So we're gonna start, as always, with LaVille. So I saw something today that the head coach for the LaVille Lancers, the football head coach, Will Hostrauser, is announced that he was going to step down um, for this year, and that was pretty shocking news because I mean he had been with the program for what's now it would be 11 years this year, but I mean he went 79-33 as a head coach. He won 2 sectional championships in 2017 and 21. He led the team to the Hoosier North Athletic Conference Championship in 22. Led the Lancers this year to an undefeated regular season as well. Had 2 10-win seasons. And what I think just encompasses Will Hochstrauser, and the most impressive thing to me was before he took over in 2013, the LaVille program had won a combined 1-19 in football games. That one win came against Trinity Lutheran out of Indianapolis. And yeah, it was just LaVille never had a football team worth watching until Will Hochstrauser took over. Before Hochstrauser took over, last time LaVille was good was 2002 and 2003 when they repeated as sectional champs and made it to the regional, and lost both of those years in the regional. And I mean, he turned the whole program around. I mean, he brought in what he thought would be successful, and boy was it. I mean, from day one, the players just took over, and they embraced the change and his mantra of how he wanted things done. And I mean, it showed in the games and seasons that followed. I mean, 2016, LaVille set the school record for football. They went 10-2 that year. Almost won the sectional championship game. Lost to Southwood 44-41. And I will continue to say that Ethan Crete scored a touchdown. You can't tell me that he didn't, because I watched him do it, and I had a camera on him, and I know that he scored a touchdown. So you cannot prove to me otherwise that he did, and I stand behind that, and I will stand behind that until I hit my grave. But in any case, then set the school record again for most wins this most recent year, and they were the first team to ever win to have a undefeated regular season as well. Finished the record season 9-0, and then in the first round of sectional beat Whiting, and then faced the biggest test of the year against the state champion and Andrean Fighting 59ers. Had the chance to host that game too, and came up on the short end. Lost to Andrean 28-6. And it was a close game until about the fourth quarter. And the fourth quarter came around, and LaVille just didn't have enough gas in the tank to hold their end, and Andrean just kind of ran away with the game. Andrean did have a Notre Dame recruit, a four-star recruit, Drake Bone, who was the linebacker and running back, and basically he was the tackler and the runner for Andrean, and he was pretty darn good the whole game. He helped Andrean hold Laville in check, running the ball, and Laville really didn't have an answer for Andrean and Drake Bowen. And Andrean ended up finishing as runner-ups in the state tournament. And Laville finished their season 10-1 and ranked number 2 in the final AP poll, above Andrean. Andrean finished number 3 in the final AP poll. So now we'll move on to more high school news. The biggest tournament in the Lakeville, Plymouth area of northern Indiana is the Bi-County Tournament, the 58th annual TCU Bi-County Tournament. That starts next week, and it is by far one of the best tournaments around. It is the tournament for schools in the Plymouth, Lakeville, Walkerton, all those areas. I mean, it is the tournament. It is probably bigger than the state tournament because, I mean, you play against people that you're friends with, and I mean, the whole community of all the schools comes out and shows up and shows out in force. And it's one of the oldest and most treasured tournaments in northern Indiana. I mean, no other tournament and no other tournament even comes close in northern Indiana to even comparing to the TCU Bi-County Tournament. The TCU Bi-County Tournament helped to be started by the late athletic director from Laville, Dale E. Cox. He helped start the tournament, and he's the pioneer, I guess, of the tournament. I mean, I can't really think of another word that basically describes that better than he was the pioneer of the tournament. He helped to get it started. I mean, he helped get all the schools together, all of the logistics, all of that stuff, and then, I mean, the tournaments since have just kind of honored him in some way. I mean, the year after he died, it was one of those where they honored Dale E. Cox with an empty seat where he always sat, and they put a picture of him there, and it was nice to see that Betty, his wife, was also there at that tournament as well. So we'll get to the pairings here. The pairings for the Bi-County Tournament are as follows. Now, these are varsity girls and boys, and also the JV as well. So it's Bremen at Triton, New Prairie at Glen, Argus at Culver, and Oregon Davis at Laville. And then the semifinals, consolation games, and championship games are all held at Laville inside the Dale E. Cox Gymnasium. And so my pick for the Bi-County Tournament, I'm going to have to go with Argus. Argus just seems like one of those teams where they're always known for defense, so you really can't score a lot on them. And if you do, you're probably having a great game or they're having an off day on defense. So my pick for the Bi-County Tournament is going to be Argus. I would say Laville, but Laville is just the Ville doesn't have any good scorers that can go out and consistently get, a lot of points. Now that being said, Collins Zarnecki for LaVille is a great shooter, but he's going to have to really step it up if he wants to lead LaVille to a bi-county tournament championship, because all of these teams are coming in and they're eyeing on that prize. They're eyeing the bi-county tournament championship because it's the most storied championship around here. I mean, a lot of the teams don't really remember a whole lot of their season, but they remember the tournament games in the bi-county tournament. And in the Ville, if they want to win, they really gotta really step it up, and Colin Zarnecki just can't be the only one out on the court for LaVille scoring the ball. Different players have got to step up, and I don't know if that's possible just yet. So I'm going to take Argus as the champion of the 58th annual TCU Bi-County Tournament. And so with that, that's going to wrap up episode 1. Kind of short and also quite long. So we'll look forward to episode 2 of the Good Fight Sports Podcast. Once again, this is Kenny Cramer signing off. Hope you have a great day. So long, everybody.
Hey everyone, we hope you enjoyed the episode today. If you did, you should go check out the rest of our episodes on our website at ccflugnutspodcast.com.
You can also listen to us wherever you find your podcasts.
Follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages by searching the Lugnuts Podcast Group.
Thanks for listening, and remember, Jesus loves you,
And
so do we.